With seemingly no end to the current lockdown situation in sight, Inside the Circle is back for its third episode, hoping to give you something to smile about. This week, our theme is World Cups, and who better to firstly welcome to the show than a man who's appeared at two of them, and is also affectionately known as the Great Wall of Ipswich, although he may be just as at home on The Greatest Dancer, given his celebrations over the last couple of years. So welcome to the show, George Pinner.
Hello, Will.
And joining George is a man who has more than 170 international appearances to his name, also appeared at two World Cups alongside two Olympic Games, and is known for being one of the sharpest and funniest men in the game. Welcome to the show, Dan Fox.
Hello, Will. No pressure there. Nice to be here.
Yeah, no pressure at all. So we're into our fifth week, I think, now of lockdown, and many of us are forced to spend quite a lot of our days at home in confined spaces. I guess that is, in a way, is sort of similar to something you guys are used to at World Cups, being in confined spaces and not being able to go out much for a 2 or 3 week period. But is this a lot different, given that you're sharing with your families and you're not sharing with grown men?
Well, yeah, the biggest benefit is not having to do the compulsory Skype call to your other half every evening to let her know what you've done for the day. That's one of the major downsides, in my opinion, of the major tournaments. But yeah, there's a fair few similarities in it, but not quite as fun, I don't think, as when you're on tour with kind of 18 other blokes, wouldn't you say, Dan?
Yeah, there was always like a big conditioning thing when you got back home to your wife or girlfriend, having spent 3 weeks away with the lads, where you all of a sudden had to kind of not take the mickey out of everything she did or make the same ridiculous office quotes every 15 seconds. So it's like a bit of just recalibrating to the normal world. But otherwise, it's there are some similarities. I mean, it's nice not to share a room with Ian Lewis or George. I think that's quite I'm not sure I've managed that for 5 weeks, but otherwise...
Yeah. We haven't had compulsory urine testing in our house every morning just yet, or morning weighings, which has obviously been another perk compared to away trips. But there's still a fairly regimental meal time, and I get the odd comment to stay out the sun, which is very much like the old Bob era. So yeah, there are a few similarities kicking around.
I mean, if you're getting those comments to stay out of the sun and you're still that dark, then
You're saving sport on vitamin D supplements.
But how, I guess it's something we noted down here, and it was slightly lower down, but it's just interesting to me. How do you then, when you are in those conditions and that sort of confined area with each other for 3 or 4 weeks, sort of how do you stay level and get through that period of time?
There used to be a strange sort of process at a big tournament whereby for the first week you travel out there, you're glad to be there, there's not much pressure because the tournament's still a long way away, and it was pretty nice, like everyone enjoyed it. And I think the stress came when you had the 2 weeks where games happen every other day, there's a lot of ups and downs, and you're basically never able to fully escape, because if you go back to your room, there's somebody else there. You walk around the hotel, there's other teams there, and there's always meetings on the horizon, there's a game to prepare for. It's quite a stressful experience, given that is the one thing that you're preparing for and you look forward to throughout all of your hockey career. When it comes to it, it can be quite hard work. I mean, what did you make of it, George? You were quite good.
I think one of the best ways to see how it changes is via the activities that people get up to, because obviously, as Dan says, you're there to play the hockey, but corridor cricket, that's a big one that gets played. A bit of cards, fun and games and pranks. And I remember when we were there, like corridor cricket would start off being quite fun. And then we had one game where a ball got kind of tossed to me and I smacked it at Gleggy. And Gleggy told me if I hit that at him again, I'd know about it. So obviously that was gentle encouragement to absolutely smack it at him again, and ended up wrestling on the floor and not coming out that better off when I hit that one at Gleggy. And, that kind of happened throughout the trip. You'd have these fun moments. Things would get more competitive. Tensions would get a little bit higher. Pranks that people found funny in the first week, that started to wear off come week 2. And the pressure builds the closer you get to the back end of tournaments. But as Dan said, it was all about kind of trying to stay level-headed and trying to stay fun. And, having good guys on the trip who try and remind you of that the whole time does make it a bit easier.
There's quite a lot of effort put into making sure we're in the room with the right person. So if we went away for one night or 2 nights, there might be a bit of experimentation. But when you were going away for 3 or 4 weeks, there was a lot of time and effort made put into making sure you're with the right person. Because I mean, it might be someone you get on really well, but if you've got to spend 24 hours a day with them, it's a completely different kettle of fish.
People change when they get in the room as well. Like, there's always been this big thing, and I'm fully aware of it, that people are like, not George, not George, not George. And I think Ash, the first time we stayed together in 2014, he was like, oh my God, it's George. And I could just imagine his reaction to that. But I was very much always fun and games, pranks, mess up someone else's room. But our room was like Fort Knox. Like, you could not come in our room unless I was sure you weren't going to muck it up. It was quite quiet in our room. And yeah, over the years, you share with someone and you just find out very unique things with them when you share a room with people, don't you, Dan? It's like a different side of them comes to, as opposed to the group dynamic. And yeah, people aren't always what they seem when they become a roommate.
It's also it's simple things like bedtime. So I shared with Ian Lewis for the last 2 years, and unless the TV was on full volume, he couldn't go to sleep. So basically, I had to wait until he'd gone to sleep, and then if I just switched the TV off, he'd sort of stir, come around, and go, "What are you doing?" So I gradually got into the habit of just turning it down one notch at a time. So it'd go from like 25 down to about 6, and then I could just get it off, and we'd both be asleep. But I mean, if you shared with Ian for the first time, you'd have no chance.
Well, I remember back in, and literally the first year I played, which was around 2007, and Jamie Ruiz from the under-21s, he had a huge fan, like an office fan, that he took everywhere with him. So we go to Australia, Youth Olympics, 22 kilos of baggage allowance. He's used 15 pretty much up with this fan. And it wasn't a quiet fan. It was like this kind of Hurricane Floyd, it gets nicknamed. And he's got that on the side, can't sleep without it. First trip in the seniors for a training camp, he gets paired with James Fair, who's a goalkeeper at the time. Now, as Foxy will tell you, James Fair very much lights off at 10 o'clock, straight asleep. Jamie Ruiz produces Hurricane Floyd, puts it on the side, switches it on. James Fair, I don't know what you think you're doing with that, but that's not happening. And those lights have got 2 minutes till they've got to be off. So, yeah, it's quite a pressurised environment living with someone, and especially new coming in, as Dan said, you don't want to be kind of falling foul of a senior player who's got his fixed routine.
You've mentioned there about perhaps players that some people wouldn't necessarily want to remove, but do you also get players that people are almost fighting over to room with as well? Is that
I can think of more people that were a short straw than over. I mean, it depends. We obviously all loved the game of hockey, but if you shared with Mikey Hoare, it would be a sort of 7 or 8 hour post-match debrief, or debrief for the training session after the game. And then the day of the match, there'd be video to go through, there'd be talking about the opposition. It was, it was intense. And some people like that, right? Some people love kind of switching on to hockey.
Although Mikey did have his perks, because back in 2013, hard drives kicked in, everyone's got series on their hard drive. Mikey Hoare, who I've got an interconnecting room with, this was less a scene on trips, but in Singapore, me and Henry were interconnecting with Mikey and his roommate. Mikey produces a little portable DVD player with a little folder of DVDs. And Mikey's got the portable DVD player, about 6, like an iPhone screen, that you can all gather around to watch portable DVDs on. So, there are perks involved with some people as well, but yeah,
he was using that about 7 years after the technology had gone out of date. Nobody had DVDs, let alone a portable DVD player. It's absolutely incredible.
But you do get people that people would like to no, I wouldn't say want to share with, but people who naturally fit together a lot better, I think, is probably a way of putting it. So yeah, that these kind of relationships naturally develop where 3 or 4 people are more comfortable sharing with each other. But I can't think of anyone queuing up or banging down doors to share with me. So I must have definitely been on the short straw, as I say.
I'd say you're an acquired taste, George. You get on pretty well. I mean, I'm just thinking so for the London 2012 Olympics, there were 3 of us sharing a room meant for 2. So it was Richard Smith, George, and myself. And the other 2 are both comfortably over 6 foot in what I describe as probably a 1-person box room. All was well until after a few of the last night festivities, George decided that rather than sleeping in his own bed, he'd come and snuggle in next to me. Little did I know before I woke up that not only was I sleeping in a bed with George, also he was completely naked.
Well, Dan had just had a bad experience, well, we all had, the knockout games hadn't gone that great, so I felt he needed a little snuggle. But I thought that was staying between us and the roommates, Dan. But now we know the line on the podcast anyway.
Yeah, anything goes.
Yeah, we definitely found the line there. You're listening to Inside the Circle. So, as the theme is World Cups, and we've talked about sharing rooms at World Cups, but I guess before all that happens, selection comes, and it's a unique time for sport. You don't really get that in anything else. So I guess from your perspective as athletes, what's selection like leading up into the biggest tournament that you will play as England?
It's a funny dynamic being part of the Great Britain squad, because for most of the year you've got 30 players training together, all trying to get better as a team. But at the back of your mind, you always know that there's going to be a point where you're competing against the person next to you. So training selection is a really strange time. I mean, I'd say to players and coaches' credit, it doesn't really ever spill out into negativity, and there's always like an overriding sense of we're trying to improve, we're trying to win this tournament as a squad. But it's a really complicated time, and I don't know, George. I'd say they've got selection these days is pretty well done, but they've been through a few different variations of how to do it.
It varies from coach to coach, and obviously you can kind of understand a coach might want to wait till as late as he possibly can to check on the form of everyone and to check that's his best team. And there's definitely been occasions when it's been later in some instance. You then have the flip side where, like London Olympics, some people found out very early on that they were going. And then again, that Olympics, you have kind of in between. Like that was one of the stranger ones where people found out in drips and drabs is probably an unfair way, but like at different ways. But generally speaking, it's kind of agreed that this is the date that selection is going to be made. You get made aware of it very far in advance. You know what it's going to look like leading up to it. So we've got these practice games to show what you can do. We've got training, and this is selection day. And what used to be a phone call, or you walk in the room. I remember the old days, you'd meet in Bisham Abbey, you'd walk up, a bit like X Factor, sit in front of the three judges, yes or no, and you leave by the back door. We've moved on now to the very personal email that comes in. And to be honest, that's player driven. A lot of players now would rather, that non-face-to-face approach, deal with it in their comfort, their own home with friends and family, especially for major tournaments. And you find out yes or no, and you follow it up at a later date. But as Dan said, it's a strange time because you go from like working all together to it being a bit more competitive. But it's handled fairly well, but it does differ, doesn't it?
Yeah, the phone call was always a disaster because you knew that they were going to phone the people who weren't selected first. So if selection was, well, for the Champions Trophy 2009, it was a bit touch and go for me, to say the least. And we were going to find out on a Friday, so trained up until Wednesday, and then basically 36 hours of nervous anticipation. So I wake up on Friday morning, no news, but you don't want to find out straight away because that's going to be, if you get a 9 a.m. phone call, that's probably going to be a no. Anyway, I got the phone call from, it was Jason Lee at the time, at 5:30 in the evening, by which time I was absolutely terrified. I just had this whole day of waiting. Unfortunately, it was good news, but they've replaced that with it's normally like an 8 a.m. email, isn't it? So basically you wake up, get the yes or no, and you can just sort of deal with it how you like. And that's a much cleaner way of doing it, I think.
Yeah, like the last 2 World Cups have been fairly kind of consistent in that way. So the one recently just gone, an email from Danny at agreed time. I think it was similar with Bob, agreed time. Back in 2010, I obviously didn't go, but I do remember like getting a message, a couple of text messages, I think it was from Jason, saying like, you are reserved for this, you're reserved for that. I just didn't totally understand the message. I have to be like, and I was like, am I reserved goalkeeper or am I reserved for the squad? So like an awkward message back to Jason of, you say reserve. Is that like the reserve that's coming to the trip? You get them on back saying, oh, no, you're the reserve staying at home. It's like, oh, I did think that was the case, but it's always not as kind of clear cut as you would like. And then obviously you have scenarios where that's your 18 players that are picked, but injuries happen and stuff like that. So that's always an interesting dynamic to add to it.
Also, if you don't get selected, it's always a miserable experience. So you spend your whole life trying to get into a squad for, particularly as it used to be, 3 months training, European Championships, 4 months training, World Cup. So I remember we went to a Champions Trophy in 2010, won a silver medal on the Sunday, flew home Sunday night. Monday, Tuesday went on holiday and got an email saying, look, you're not selected for the Commonwealth Games, and for the basically for good, you're no longer part of the Great Britain squad. And I got this email in a field in the middle of North Wales on holiday with at the time my girlfriend, now wife, and she sort of saw my face drop. You right, Dan? Basically, I mean, it's never going to be a good message, and there's never going to be a good way of receiving that. So I think if you speak to any player, particularly even in the England Great Britain squad, there's a bit of a perception that they've been successful and been selected for this and that, but probably all those players have also had that experience of getting dropped for things or not being selected for things. Because George, you had that in 2009, right? You're not
yeah,
sorry.
No. Well, I remember it well. Like, you played like the whole summer. I discussed it with Ian, and it didn't go particularly well. Had all these new inexperienced defenders in front of me, like Dan, so it was making my life miserable in goal. But but no, we play this summer, don't do that well. But like, there'd only been 2 goalies really training as part of it. Nick came to a couple of sessions, and on selection day, you get told no. You're like, sorry, there's only 2 goalies in the squad. Like, have I been dropped for like an outfield player? And like, they're like, no, we're still going to pick Nick. And as I said, that was really tough to take back then. I can take it now, but I had 4 years of not being picked, and it doesn't get any easier. And it's why even when you get picked, however much people tell you that you're a certainty for trips or you're definitely going to get picked, I think you still sit around waiting for that email, no matter who you are. I know, even speaking to Barry, he never took one selection for granted, and even he was, waiting for that call up. So yeah, that doesn't change.
Given that then you've both been through those difficult times, when you are then subsequently selected for something like a World Cup, how good does that feel?
Yeah, that's a bit. I remember in 2014, like, we got actually something I wasn't expecting, like a letter from Sally Munday, who obviously, chief exec at the time. And you forget that it's the biggest competition you can play in as an England player, because obviously the Olympics is GB. So you get this basically saying, thank you. And that one in Holland in particular had a load of. Sorry, Dan, we disturbing you there?
Boring me. Sorry, no, I was doing the window.
No, but we've got, like, as I said, we had that letter, and then when we turned up to that tournament, you're playing in football stadiums and stuff like that have been converted into hockey stadiums, and the just enormous nature of it, you suddenly realise how big a World Cup is. I think because you have the Olympics, sometimes it can get forgotten as to just how big an event the World Cup is, and yeah, that definitely was huge for me around 2014. Your kind of 2010 experience, first Cup World experience, was a bit different, wasn't it, Foxy?
Yeah, that was crazy. So I'd only played 14 times for England at the time, and I was reserved for the World Cup in India. So the World Cup was in Delhi. Preparation was mixed because there'd been a serious terrorist threat on the whole tournament. So there'd been this: will they, won't they put it on? Will they move it? Anyway, the squad went out to Qatar, trained, and then went on to the World Cup. I was teaching at the time, playing hockey part-time around my job. I got a phone call 2 days before they flew to India to say Matt Daly had broken his foot. You're next in line if anyone else gets injured. So just so you know. So I went to work and said, look, it's still massive outside chance, but just so you know what the situation is. And I remember being sat in the staff room and just having a chat with someone saying, look, I could, until midnight tonight, I could get the nod to go to India on the first flight. And at that very moment, my phone rings. It's Bobby Crutchley saying Simon Tell had another shocking bit of luck, had been hit on the foot, broken his toe, wouldn't be able to play in the tournament. Can you get to London Heathrow Airport by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning and come out to play in the tournament? And given the nature of our sport, that those sorts of things sometimes happen. It's obviously terrible luck for both Sai and Matt Daly. And from it came an opportunity for me that I hadn't been expecting. And in George saying about the World Cup in Holland being a massive event with 18,000 people at the stadium, that tournament in Delhi had 25,000 people for our games against India, for the India-Pakistan games, just as many. And it was an incredible thing to be thrown into.
As well as the preparation then that goes in to being able to play your game and being able to perform at your best, what sort of preparation do you do to get used to playing in front of big crowds like that? Because we don't have the stadiums over here as much in the UK, and we don't experience it as much over here.
You learn in the first 3 minutes. I think that's how I found out about it. Like, first time in India, like, you just have like noise behind the goal, like constantly. And, you know, in World Cup in Holland, when you walked out, the main one there was like the game against Holland. It was a packed stadium. But I think it hits you how awesome it is. But then it's like a job. You just almost switch, I think, into black. And, you know, you look around and think, this is amazing. And then 2 seconds later, you realise, I need to be telling people like to mark and stuff like that. And I always found you forgot about it quite quickly. When you're letting goals, you became a lot more aware of it and stuff like that. But that's a bit more position unique. You were out on the sidelines a bit. Did it ever bother you?
It's a weird dynamic, because as soon as you get above 4,000 people, you just hear like a wall of noise. Below that, you can hear, you know, and you do get this, particularly on home soil, actually, people giving you a bit of advice about what to do. Often it's just trap it, Dan, trapping it. But
Half match, to be fair to Dan, there was a period where when you lay the pitch, however well you lay it, it always has like a grain. So like you knock a ball one way and it rolls flat. You knock it the other way and it has a little bobble. And it usually meant that right back or left back, one of them got a bobbly pass in the first few minutes. And there was a period, Ali Wilson got it. And then I think Dan inherited the role of basically back to full back, shit there, go to stop it. And it bounces over your stick, and a load of helpful advice.
yeah, I think that's pretty generous, George. For an international hockey player, I should probably be able to stop it. But yeah. No, it's really interesting. India was probably the loudest I've heard. And we had a game where India were playing Pakistan before us. So we arrived in the stadium before their game started. And the Pakistani fans arrived with one bloke at the front with a massive Pakistan banner. And they sort of arrived in one end of the stadium. And as they did it, the noise was unbelievable and the whole place shook. And crowds there are slightly, you know, you hear slightly different noises if you watch a football match in like Italy or Spain or England. Well, there, if your team doesn't score, if your team concedes, it just goes totally silent. So you went from 24,500 Indian fans absolutely going wild, they concede, and then you can just hear these 500 Pakistan fans get absolutely nuts in one corner of the stadium, and everybody else in total silence. Absolutely incredible. Never seen anything like it. It's amazing.
Well, that was the same in like Bhubaneswar recently, that they'll be going wild and then you score and the place just goes silent. And it's like, oh, we've like, have we scored? And it's really weird because they're so passionate, but they realise their team have let in a goal and it just goes quiet. But it's always amazing as well what people can pick up, as Dan said, like the helpful comments. Like you can, some people leave a game and they're just not aware of any of it. Some are aware of the odd comment and stuff like that. And I always remember, like, we went a couple of goals down as England in a World Cup qualifier against Canada. And I think someone, rather than come on England, stood up and went, there goes your funding. And everyone, like, it was the only comment that everyone heard because we were just kind of stopped, ready to play. But it seemed to, you know, kind of spur us on because we went and won that 5-2. But yeah, most of the time you don't hear the specifics. It's only one or two of you that hear them. But yeah, you do pick up on the odd comment. You've got to be thick-skinned and let it go, whether it's kind of cheering you on, which is a great encouragement. But those type of stuff, you just let it go.
Where's your favourite place to play, George?
Well, I have always liked India because it's been full. Lee Valley's fantastic because it's a home crowd, and I think everyone loves. You get all your family down and stuff like that. In terms of one-off game, the World Cup in Holland is the one. Like that game against Holland in the semi-final, that place was just beaming, and you know it was absolutely packed to the rafters, and kind of wish I'd taken a bit more of that in. But yeah, home soil's pretty cool. India's cool, but that was my favourite. I think yours.
Yeah, London 2012 with the bigger Lee Valley Stadium, so to have 16,000 was comfortably the best place to play, partly because of the whole atmosphere, but also inside the stadium. And outside of that, probably India, yeah, just for the passion of the fans.
Going back to something you said earlier, Dan, about the 2010 World Cup, obviously getting that late call-up was fantastic for you, but then you also mentioned about the Al-Qaeda warnings. Did that sort of temper that slightly, or had by that time you got the call-up, had they sort of, the terrorist threat around the World Cup seemingly disappeared?
It actually been a pretty smooth build up for me because I was, as I say, I was a bit of an outside chance to get in the squad anyway. So a lot of those decisions where the player group had meetings with security experts and things, I sort of took a bit of a back seat on. By the time, I mean, the phone call itself was quite interesting. So Bobby phoned me and said, "Look, can you make the flight?" And then Jason Lee, who's head coach, phoned me that evening and he said, "Look, you haven't done all the preparation. There's obviously the jet lag and the time zone difference. So there's a chance you're going to fly out here." And at the time, it's a squad of 18, but only 16 played in a given match. So you'd have a spare goalie and a spare player in the stand. So Jason said, "Look, there's a chance you're going to fly out here for the best part of 3 weeks and just watch some hockey from the sidelines. We can pick someone else if you like." So I was like, "Jason, I mean, not many people get to go to a Hockey World Cup to watch it, let alone playing it. So I'm on the flight. Don't worry about that." And so the stuff in the background made no difference. I was just so pleased to get out there. And on the flight out there, actually, from Heathrow, there were about 9 or 10 people going out from Indian Gymkhana Hockey Club who were supporting India, so from there originally, and we basically got chatting in the airport, talking about the tournament and how much it meant to them and what they were hoping from the Indian side. And as soon as I sort of had that conversation, I had a rush to get my kit ready. I was like, "Oh, this is real." And from then on, it was an amazing few weeks.
Subscribe to Inside the Circle now from all of your usual podcast providers.
And then you get out to the countries, whether it's India or whether it's the Netherlands, and something people don't see beforehand, but you have warm-up matches. I guess, what are they like to play in? Because it must be quite weird that knowing this is an important time to sort of get everything set and prepared, but also you don't necessarily want to give too much away or get injuries or anything like that.
We've had a fairly decent record the last couple of years. Before the World Cup at Bhubaneswar, we had a good result against Germany. Can't remember the other games we played, but they were fairly positive. But traditionally, that's not been the way. I don't know if were you out there for the Australia game before the World Cup in 2010, or would you not go out there by that point?
Because I wasn't there. Yeah,
I think that, and I don't want to do anyone disservice. I think it was 10-0, and that's to Australia. It was definitely high. That team, though, however, a few days later went and beat Australia to basically then qualify, to make the semi-finals and ultimately, do brilliantly that tournament. I think we then had a game against Australia before our World Cup, so a bit of a theme here. This was actually before we went out. That was, I think, for India. But again, Australia, one of the best teams in the world. I think we took a bit of a 5-1 beating back at Bisham. So yeah, they're kind of tough games, aren't there? There's a bit of dark humour around those kind of things.
Yeah, there's like an understanding that until a week before the tournament, if you play a game, you just fully go for it because you need to get up to the intensity, you need to practice. And then within 4 or 5 days of the game, normally when you get to the venue, you need a bit of match practice on the pitch. But there's things like you might not run a number one line like you normally would at a defensive short corner, basically stuff to safeguard you against injury, make sure no one gets a ball.
That's really fun in goal as well, when the flicker realises teams aren't doing this and basically goes, "Oh, here we go." And rather than releasing it at the top, drags it in an extra few yards and just destroys all your confidence in goal. But yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that, George, because we had this, that was the sort of approach we took to our warm-up game against Korea in 2014. At the end of the game, both sides decided to do some shuffles as a bit of a practice. So it's like whatever you do in goal, don't injure any of the opposition. It's just sort of probably the right thing to do. But George, what was your approach to that shootout?
Well, I thought we should win it. So I got ultra competitive. Guy went round me and I kicked his foot and made sure he didn't score. I did regret it afterwards. I did think, as Dan said, like, this isn't the party line when it comes to practice games. He actually had played with Barry and Ash and Cy at HGC and Ian Lewis for a long period of time. But he went down and he went, "Ugh!" And I really thought I hurt him. And that's a real no-no because, everyone wants the best players to play in tournaments. And he got up after a few minutes and he didn't say much then. But when we got back to the hotel, he just walked past me and he went, "Bad man, very bad man." And his English wasn't amazing despite having lived with those guys for a long time. And for the remainder of his and my career, when they overlapped, he just walked past me and smiled and referred to me as the very bad man. But as Foxy said, it's kind of, that was a bit of a no-no, but injuries aren't what you want in those, are they? Like 2014, ours was riddled by
Yeah,
stuff.
we so that warm-up game
2010 was as well, but yeah, 14.
Yeah, well, that warm-up game against Australia at Bisham in 2014, two of their players went home, didn't they? Glenn Simpson tore his calf and went home, and the other guy played up front, broke his ankle or something. Anyway, two of them didn't play in the tournament, and then for us, Ashley hurt his shoulder and struggled to flick for most of the tournament. And Ian Lewis got a dead leg, which can be innocuous, but this one lasted probably 10 days. And I had the short straw of sharing a hotel room with him where he had an ice machine on, which is on basically 24 hours a day, pumps ice around, but it doesn't do it quietly. So from the hours of 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. when Ian was in bed and he sleeps for a long time, you just have the constant like beep, 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 beep. It's like, Ian, do you definitely need that on? It's like, hands are tied. Got to recover.
Foxy's doing a disservice to how loud this machine is as well. So like, when you go back to roommates, there are some noisy things that can irritate you, but having an injured teammate on the game ready's got to be up there with like the top you do not want. And I remember he was across the road and like across the hall from us, and you'd get Dan in every morning like bags just getting bigger. And in mine, Dan's playing spare fullback because Ian can't play, like new position. You all right, Dan? Yeah, just didn't get much sleep tonight. Ian's had the game ready on for a few hours. And then we just had Ian walk in one morning, kind of happy as Larry. Are you all right, Ian? He's like, no, don't think I am actually. I think maybe we should call up Ollie Willars. It's like, Lewis, we're 2 games into the tournament, mate. The squad got handed in 6 days ago. You need to get fit. But he was hilarious. Well, hilarious that trip because A, had a huge impact later on it. But he was on the bench, and I remember a bit like John Terry style. We worked, that tournament, they started putting GoPros on the bench to record some of the subs. And you got Ian sitting on the ice box because it was a big bench area just watching the game. And we score a last-minute winner, and he just stands up and starts tapping his head, shouting at people like kind of Brian Clough. And he got like Lewis cam basically for the first 2 games having been injured. But yeah, it was pretty bad. Like he missed out. You talked about signed day loss, but Ash like couldn't flick. And I remember like first game, someone flicked a corner and like all the press coverages, why aren't you flicking? And Ash is like, I want to let everyone else have a go. And it made me laugh because Ash took loads of stick for like the approach he took in the press conference of like, some of the comments he was making. But you don't want to tell people you're injured. But these games always carry risks, and that's 2 World Cups where we lost people, and we lost Sam Ward again before this World Cup just gone. So injuries always disrupt everything, and have a big impact on stuff.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because there's quite a dark humour around it. I mean, I'm not a grief specialist, right? But like the way people cope, particularly in sport, is normally to use a bit of humour around it. So regardless of what happens at the time, people are there and supportive, but also you always get people making light of it to try and take away the pressure. Because otherwise, in that World Cup, Tim Whiteman broke his thumb. Obviously Ian Lewis, Ashley, you've got 3 or 4 injuries at any one time, and I think if everyone focuses too much on them, then the intensity of it just kind of will get you down. Whereas a bit of a laugh and a joke around it makes it a lot easier.
You mentioned
the scoreline as well used to be a big thing. Going back just briefly to those, there used to be a joke that if a team didn't beat us by more than 5, then they'd struggle in the tournament. And I'm sure we would have far rather been beating teams 10-0 and losing like today's scorelines. But it was amazing how, as a player, you frame the narrative. You create the narrative, to be what you want it to be. And ours around that time used to be, we're in a good place, scorelines don't matter. They haven't beaten us by as many as they should have, stuff like that. And it was all about what happened in the first game, really. As I say, you just tried not to get injured and roll with the punches if these negatives happened that weren't ideal.
And you mentioned when you were regaling the story about the incident with the Korean player, about how you, and you've mentioned previously as well, about how teams often share hotels at big events like World Cups. Do you find that there are sometimes sort of mind games played between the 2 of you when you're sharing the same facilities?
I absolutely hated sharing hotel rooms with other teams because you basically at every opportunity, so meal times, meeting rooms, going up and down the lift, there's so much opportunity for people to get like a little one up on the opposition. So it's like, we got the lift, you got to get the stairs. It's like, I don't care, but Also, I do care. So I just basically, I'd like when you come back from the hockey pitch, it's so nice to be able to switch off. So if you end up in the same hotel as another team, it's I used to hate that.
Or you get the lift after a tight game that you've just lost, and there's just this awkward tension in the lift. Or, as in the 2014 World Cup, lovely hotel. We arrive, we find that we're in the same hotel as the Dutch, who've hired like the top penthouse floor, taking meals in like the really fancy restaurant and stuff like that. But yeah, and you also get like, you talk about one-upman though. I remember Hoffman, who ran one for them at corners, did his foot in the game before the semis, walked around in a boot and on crutches for 2 days, and then he came out and played the next day and stuff like that. But it is all strange, and it varies from team to team because each team has their unique kind of things. I remember that game as well. I actually injured someone else, not making a trend of it, but it was a Malaysian guy, like in the game, kicked him in the face. Didn't mean to, sliding across goal, kick him in the face. Didn't, obviously stretch it off, horrendous for him, but he was fine, dislocated shoulder, bit of cut. But the Malaysian team were in our hotel and like come down for dinner, and they've obviously made the Malaysian TV aware that I'm there. There's a guy with a camera and a microphone just standing waiting for me at the lift, and it's like, have you got a message for his family? And I was like, sorry, has he died? And they're like, no, he will never play a major tournament again. And I'm like, well, it wasn't quite what I was expecting en route to Stag Bowl for dinner, but yeah, I'm really sorry I've injured him, and didn't mean to do it, etc., etc. But it's very, very strange because obviously football, rugby, you'd always stay in completely different hotels, kind of have them as your own, whereas we are in the same tournament. And I got reminded of it the other day, going back to corridor cricket. I don't remember this, but apparently playing some corridor cricket in 2014, the South Africans won our floor. Apparently Austin Smith came, bowled me a ball that did me all ends up, knocked out my stumps, and the South Africans absolutely loved it. Not that I'm the most difficult batsman to get out, but one of their guys put that on my Facebook wall, and that's 6 years later. So it's amazing the things other teams remember about players and individuals from trips.
So we've covered selections for World Cups, we've covered sharing rooms, and we've covered the preparation games. We haven't actually got round to covering what playing at a World Cup is properly like, and Zoom is about to cut us off. So I suggest that we finish this podcast here and we reconvene very shortly.
Inside the Circle will return next week with our second part of this World Cup special with Dan Fox and George Pinner, where they talk about some of their favourite games they've played in, including that incredible 3-2 victory over Belgium in 2014. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to Inside the Circle now, to make sure you never miss an episode.